The morning light came thin and pale through a blanket of low clouds, painting the park in dull silver. Frost clung to the grass, brittle under the weak sun. Daniel's breath hung in the air as he walked along the winding path, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his overcoat. He wasn't supposed to be here, he was on his way to work, or at least that was the excuse, but something about the quiet drew him in. The park had always been his thinking place when life felt too loud. He hadn't expected to find a ghost sitting on the bench. At first, he didn't recognize him. The man's shoulders were hunched, a faded beanie pulled low over his ears. His clothes looked worn, like they'd been slept in too many nights, the edges frayed and the colors dulled by rain and wind. But when the man lifted his head slightly, Daniel felt a jolt in his chest. It was Michael. 5 years had passed, but the face was unmistakable. The same angular jaw, though thinner now, the same blue-gray eyes, though they looked older, tired. Daniel froze mid-step. For a long moment he just stared, unsure whether to move forward or turn back. The memories pressed in hard, nights spent planning their dream business, celebrating small wins with cheap beer, laughing over their shared failures. Then the memories turned darker, the arguments, the disappointment, the silence that followed. He hadn't thought about Michael in months. Maybe even years. It was easier that way. After the company failed and Michael started calling for help, Daniel had distanced himself. He'd convinced himself it was the right decision. He had a wife, a mortgage, responsibilities. Lending money to a man spiraling down felt reckless. Still, guilt had never fully gone away. Now here he was, the man Daniel once called his best friend, looking like he'd fallen through the cracks of the world. Michael was holding a paper cup of coffee, though it seemed more steam than liquid. His fingers shook as he brought it to his lips. A small flock of pigeons pecked at crumbs near his shoes. He smiled faintly at them, softly, absent-mindedly, as if they were old friends. Daniel hesitated. He could just keep walking. Pretend he hadn't seen him. That would be easier. Michael probably wouldn't even notice. But something inside him wouldn't let him move. His feet felt rooted to the frozen ground. Finally, he exhaled a shaky breath and stepped forward. Michael. The man turned slowly, eyes narrowing for a moment as if searching through memory. Then a small, surprised smile tugged at his lips. Daniel, he said, voice rough but gentle. Didn't think I'd see you again. Daniel tried to smile, but it came out crooked. Yeah, it's been a while. 5 years, maybe. Michael rubbed his hands together for warmth. You haven't changed much. Daniel wanted to say the same, but that would have been a lie. Michael looked like he had carried the years on his back, every one of them heavier than the last. His face was hollow, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, yet there was still a calmness in him, a quiet steadiness that somehow made Daniel's chest ache. You look good, Daniel said, instantly hating how hollow it sounded. Michael let out a dry laugh. Good. I guess that's one word for it. He gestured to the bench beside him. Sit, if you've got a minute. Daniel sat down. The wooden slats were cold through his coat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the city, distant traffic, a barking dog, the flutter of pigeon wings, filled the silence between them. How have you been? Daniel asked finally. Getting by, Michael said simply. You know how it is. Daniel didn't know. Not really. He lived in a warm apartment, had a steady job, dinners with his wife every night. The last time he'd truly worried about surviving was back in college. Michael must have seen the confusion in his face because he smiled again, softer this time. Don't look at me like that. I'm not dead yet. Daniel swallowed. I didn't mean. I know, Michael said. It's fine. They sat in silence again. Daniel's mind replayed their last real conversation, the one that had ended everything. Michael had come to him desperate, humiliated. He'd said he just needed a little help, alone, a few weeks to get things straight. Daniel had wanted to help, he really had, but his wife had been firm. We can't afford to get dragged into his mess, she'd said. He's made bad choices. Don't make them yours. And so Daniel had refused. He remembered Michael's expression, how his hope had drained away all at once. Not anger, not even sadness, just a kind of acceptance that hurt worse than shouting ever could. Now, sitting beside him again, Daniel felt that same ache resurface. He cleared his throat. You staying somewhere? A shelter, maybe. Michael shrugged. Sometimes. Sometimes I find a place. Sometimes not. It's not as bad as you think. Daniel flinched. Michael, Michael turned to him, eyes steady. Don't, he said gently. Don't do the whole apology thing. It's okay. It's not, Daniel said, his voice almost breaking. I should have helped you. You were my friend. Michael's lips quirked in a tired smile. We were friends, yeah. And friends make choices. You made yours, I made mine. That's life. But even as he said it, Daniel could hear the quiet sadness in his tone, the words meant to forgive, but heavy with the weight of what couldn't be undone. The pigeons fluttered closer, one perching boldly near Michael's shoe. He reached down and crumbled a piece of bread from his pocket, tossing it to them. See, he said softly. Still got company. Daniel watched, throat tight. Even now, Michael was sharing what little he had. I've missed you, Daniel admitted. Michael looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, he said finally. Me too. He stood then, brushing crumbs off his hands. Take care of yourself, Dan. Daniel rose quickly. Wait, let me help you, just this once. I can get you something, money, food, whatever you need. Michael shook his head. No, really, I'm okay. I've made peace with things. Michael, please. Michael smiled faintly, that same calm look that made Daniel feel small and undeserving. It's all right, he said. You've got a good life. Keep it that way. And then, before Daniel could think of what else to say, he turned and began walking down the path, the frost crunching under his worn boots. Daniel stood there watching, the air sharp and cold against his face. He wanted to call out, to say something, anything, but the words stayed trapped in his throat. He watched Michael's figure grow smaller until it vanished behind the trees. The pigeons scattered, taking to the sky in a flurry of wings. Daniel sank back onto the bench, his heart heavy, the silence pressing in on him like a weight. He whispered, too softly for anyone to hear, I'm sorry. But the wind carried the words away, and they disappeared into the empty park, unheard. The news came on a gray Tuesday morning, folded inside the daily paper Daniel barely read anymore. He had been stirring his coffee, the rhythmic clink of the spoon keeping him company in the quiet kitchen, when the headline caught his eye. It wasn't even a headline, just a small paragraph buried near the bottom of the page, one of those cold, bureaucratic notices that seemed to exist only to be forgotten. Unidentified man found deceased near Riverside Park. Exposure suspected. Authorities are investigating. No foul play indicated. There was a photo. Small, grainy, black and white. But Daniel didn't need more than a glance. The man's face, partially shadowed, and shaven, eyes closed as if asleep, was unmistakable. Michael. For a long time, Daniel didn't move. The spoon slipped from his fingers and clattered against the counter. His coffee went cold. He stared at the photo until the words blurred. Something hollow opened inside his chest, a soundless ache, like the moment after a window shatters and you can't yet hear the glass hit the floor. He thought of the last time he'd seen him, sitting on the park bench, feeding pigeons, smiling that tired but gentle smile. Michael had walked away into the wind, refusing help with the same quiet dignity he'd always carried, even when he had nothing left. Now, that same park had taken him. Daniel folded the paper slowly, his hands shaking. He wanted to deny it, to tell himself it wasn't true, that maybe it was someone else. But deep down, he knew. He'd known from the moment he'd read the words Riverside Park. His wife, Rachel, found him sitting at the kitchen table an hour later, the paper still clenched in his hand. Daniel, she asked softly, touching his shoulder. What is it? He didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. It's Michael. Her hand stilled. Oh, Dan. He's gone. He looked up at her with wet eyes, and for the first time in years, he looked lost. He died in the cold. The same bench, probably. I should have done something. Rachel sighed, kneeling beside him. You couldn't have known. I did know, Daniel said, his voice cracking. I saw him. I saw how he was living. And I just let him walk away. There was nothing more to say. She wrapped her arms around him, but it didn't help. Nothing could ease the heaviness pressing down on him now. The next morning, Daniel drove to the park. The air was sharp and bitter, the ground dusted with frost that glimmered faintly in the weak sunlight. The pond had frozen over, a thin layer of ice catching the reflection of the dull gray sky. He found the bench easily. It was empty, but a few crumbs still lingered near its legs, and the pigeons gathered there as if waiting for him. For a long time, Daniel just stood, staring at that spot, his breath clouding in front of him. Finally, he sat down. The wood was cold and unyielding beneath him. He took a small bag of breadcrumbs from his pocket, he didn't even remember deciding to bring it, and scattered a handful onto the ground. The pigeons hopped closer, pecking eagerly. You remember him, don't you? Daniel murmured. His voice trembled. He fed you, too. One of the birds, a gray one with a white streak down its neck, fluttered up to the bench beside him. It tilted its head, watching him with bright, unblinking eyes. Daniel almost laughed through his tears. Guess you do. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the small, steady cooing of the pigeons. The world moved as it always did, indifferent, unpausing. It felt wrong that life could go on so easily. When he finally stood, his knees stiff from the cold, he made his way to the small shelter near downtown, the one Michael had mentioned in passing years ago. The woman at the desk looked up as he entered, a kind but tired face framed by a wool scarf. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here about someone who used to stay here, Daniel said, his voice uneven. Michael Harper. Her expression softened. Oh, you knew him. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He was my friend. She sighed, looking down. He was a good man. Quiet, polite, always helped out, even when he didn't have to. Fixed our heater last winter when we couldn't afford a technician. Gave away his blanket more than once. Said others needed it more. Daniel's throat tightened. That sounds like him. We held a little memorial yesterday, she continued. A few people came, some from the shelter, some from the street. You're welcome to visit the plaque if you want. It's by the community garden. He thanked her and followed her directions. The garden was small, fenced by weathered wooden patches of frost-bitten soil. In one corner, a line of small brass plaques marked the names of those who had passed. Simple, unadorned, each one a life once lived and forgotten by most. Daniel knelt beside the newest one. Michael Harper, 1984–2025. There were a few wilted flowers nearby and a scrap of paper with a handwritten note, "Thank you for fixing the heater. We won't forget you." Daniel placed a trembling hand on the plaque. The metal was cold, but he held it anyway, as if he could somehow reach through it and say everything he'd never said. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have been there. You asked for help, and I turned away. You forgave me, and I didn't deserve it. He stayed like that until his knees ached and his fingers grew numb. When he finally rose, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the frozen earth. On his way out, he stopped by the shelter's donation board. It was cluttered with names, dates, and small notes of encouragement. At the bottom, there was a sign-up sheet for volunteers. Daniel took the pen and wrote his name. It started small. A few hours a week. Sorting clothes, serving food, fixing broken things. He was good with his hands, and for once, he put that to use for something that mattered. The first time he repaired a cracked table leg, he thought of Michael and how he'd once said, "Everything can be fixed if you care enough to try." Weeks passed. The ache didn't fade, but it changed shape, less a wound, more a reminder. Daniel found comfort in small acts of kindness. When someone asked for help, he didn't hesitate anymore. When he saw someone struggling, he stopped. It was his way of keeping a promise, to never refuse again. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he returned to Riverside Park. The bench was still there, waiting beneath the bare branches. He'd sit with his bag of breadcrumbs, scattering them for the pigeons as the sun slipped low. The world would fade into shades of blue and silver, and for a moment, he'd imagine Michael sitting beside him, laughing softly, eyes warm again. The wind would move through the trees like a whisper, gentle and familiar. And though Daniel knew it was only his mind filling the silence, he could almost hear Michael's voice saying, "It's all right, Dan. You made it right." Then Daniel would smile, wipe his eyes, and scatter the last of the crumbs. Because regret, he had learned, could not bring back the dead. But kindness, small, persistent, and unrefused, could still honor them. And in that, there was a kind of peace.